So welcome everyone here. Welcome everyone on the live stream. My name is Melissa Temme. If you see me on campus, I actually go by Missy, and you want to talk to me, say Missy, because I might not answer to Melissa. This is my career name, but here I am just myself. I am the former National Public Relations Director for the Salvation Army. We'll cover that a little bit more in just a sec. Go to the next. Today our topic is communicating in a crisis. So this can cover many different topics, which we will hit on. But Jenny just asked me to do this because she felt like it's relevant really in any area of our lives, but it's relevant all the more as we need to communicate well in a quickly changing area, like culture, right? No matter what culture you're in. Let's go ahead.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it was not or not.
No, there you go. You're good. So who am I? Why do you want to listen to me? First off, I served as the National Public Relations Director for the Salvation Army USA for a number of years. I started out in their communications department, worked my way up, worked Katrina, some of those types of disasters and various crises for the organization. The way that organization works is not top down. It is very much grassroots up. So we provided a lot of support. Just to give you some background on how we worked. Yeah, come on. We provided support for the local units. And then we were the liaison to national media. So we provided the national media strategy, we provided the national media spokespeople, anything along those lines. And then we worked to really coordinate messages as needed with the local community. One of the areas that we covered and that we provided a lot of support for locally was crisis communications. So that usually covered three topics for us. One was natural disasters. So in a natural disaster, our goal in communicating was first, we are a social service organization, right? So our goal, and we're religious, so we want to honor the Lord. Our goal is to tell the people who need help where to find help, and doing that through the media or other partners. So that was the first goal. And I say goals because when you're communicating, you need to know what your goal is. And if you have your goals straight, and aligned with what the Lord has put on your heart, you're going to communicate better. If you don't know what your goals are a little amiss, things are going to go a little bit haywire. So that's the first goal. The second goal in communicating in a disaster is you need donors usually, and you need volunteers, or you need things to be able to provide assistance. You need people who are going to help support and fund that assistance. A crisis is a crisis. You might have some funds for a crisis fund, but you typically run out of those rather quickly depending on the size of the crisis. So this is how communications works with programming to be able to provide for what's needed. So you are telling the world what you're doing so that you can get donors, right, to help you fund the people you're trying to help. The third thing you do in a natural disaster is you're communicating accountability to the people who've already given. And that's really important too. You're saying this is what we've done with your money. The second area is activism. That has only increased since I've been home with my kids. I watch it regularly and assess the different communication styles. But that is, I think we all understand what that is, but when you are an organization, whether it's a small parish or church or a large organization, you stand for something in particular, and other people have different opinions. Sometimes they will try to use your organization to make a point in order to enact social change. And when that happens, you need to have a strong sense of self and a good plan to be able to respond to that without getting caught in the fight, if that makes sense. So activism was the second thing. The third thing, what we're really going to focus on today, although what we'll talk about will apply to many things, but we're going to talk about human error. So someone has sinned. Someone's made a big mistake. And it happens. I mean, we all know that it happens. So I'm just not even going to say anything more about that because we're going to cover that kind of a lot. Let's go ahead. All right. What is crisis communications? First, I want to talk about what it is not. From a biblical perspective, this is not reputation management. Now, I have a really good friend who's done crisis communications for 30 years, and we talked about this. Public relations is reputation management. I mean, that would be an okay definition. But for us, we cannot ever focusing on reputation as your goal for what you want to save is not biblical. And it will not actually lead you to make good choices. It usually leads to manipulation of information. So like stretching the truth or like only telling part of the truth. So you're not lying, but it implies something that's not really true because you're trying to guard. Hiding at the expense of victims or the congregation. As believers, a positive reputation in a crisis situation, first, it's not going to be positive. You're in a crisis. Something bad has happened. People are going to be sad, right? They're going to be disappointed. And we have to be okay with that. But you're looking at the long haul. Crisis communications is not about what happens right here in the crisis. It is the goal of the long term to care well for your people, everyone who's involved, which includes the people outside of the situation. So a positive reputation is an outcome from excellent communication, not the goal of it. You cannot manage what others think, say, or believe. You can only manage your presentation of the truth and the timeliness of that presentation. That does not mean that, oh shoot, well, anything's going to happen anyway. Again, we'll cover some of this a little bit later. But a lot of times, we think certain aspects of a crisis are inevitable in people's opinions. Oh, well, this is just going to happen anyway, But really, if we don't communicate in a timely way with as much information as we can, what we're going to find is that people will fill in those gaps. They're going to fill it in for you. Usually it's wrong. Usually it's full of offense. And you've created a secondary crisis that can take years to overcome if you overcome it. And usually that crisis is only healed by doing what you should have done in the first place, which is say as much as you can, as quickly as you can, and be consistent to do that over and over. Okay, it is not a defensive posture. Hold on, don't come close. Nobody come near. This is my ivory tower. We don't want that. You're not fortifying or protecting your city walls against your constituents or the media. Your goal, you want to be wise. I'm not saying like, okay, let me just tell you everything all the time at any time. That's not what it is, and we'll get into that. But your goal is not to hide the truth. It really is to plan for it. There is so much planning that can happen in advance of anything for crisis. You can plan for crises. You can plan on how to communicate a crisis. And then when a crisis happens and you have the details of what it is, you already have the structure for how to walk that out. Be comfortable, kind of said this already, but be comfortable with the fact that bad news will cause disappointment and upset. Just be comfortable with that. It's like when you go to a friend and you've done something you shouldn't have done, and you have to confess that, which is what? Biblical. They're going to be sad. They're going to be disappointed. These are relational ideas. As much as there are certain differences between individuals and corporate, but not that different. So it just be comfortable with that. Bad news will cause disappointment and upset, but you don't want to try to control that. That was the word today, right? You're not controlling. You're not trying to manage their thoughts and actions or their disappointment. You're trying to lead through the upset with proper planning, the right motivations, and proper communication that comes from that. I do want to say about that, proper planning is good. The right motivations are good. But what I don't want to imply is that any old person will naturally then come up with the right conclusions on how to communicate. This really is an expertise. What we're doing here is lighting a spark that can create a forest fire as you investigate more. So I would say that it's really wise to talk to people who have experience in this, because much like the things the Lord says to us that sometimes don't make sense, we're like, why would you ask that of me? Sometimes communicating in a crisis, it very much pushes against our desire for self-protection. It is protective, it is wisdom, but your main goal is not Like, hi. Okay. So it should not be driven by fear. It cannot be driven by fear. Fear of losing parishioners, fear of media coverage. If you are if you're in a meeting and something difficult has happened and you said, well, if we say that, people might leave. Then I'm telling you right now, your fear is that people might leave. You're not going to make a great decision about how to communicate and what to communicate. All right, next one. All right, what crisis communications is a commitment to communicate as much as you can, when you can, as well as you can, in order to establish and maintain trust in a difficult situation. So often that's the thing that is suffering, is trust. And when we do drips and drops of communication, when it's inconsistent because we're making it up as we go, because the people who are having to make decisions are already responding to the crisis, right? So you're not only having to decide how to communicate, you're also doing all the motions that you need to do to respond to the crisis. So we'll get into that in just a second. It's leading the conversation by choosing what is important to say and following it up with behavior and actions that demonstrate ownership and authenticity. BP, maybe a decade ago, I don't remember the exact date, check my time. They had an oil spill, and in the day, now with such technology, they couldn't deny it. Something terrible had happened, and there's a lot of footage of it, right? So what did they do right off the bat? Well, first off, they had a communications plan for a crisis, and this was on it because they had assessed their vulnerabilities. So when that happened and it broke, they came out. They were already prepared to come out immediately, recognize the issue, and apologize. First thing out of their mouth. We are so sorry. We see the issue. We are going to take responsibility, and we will get out there and we will help solve this problem. That was their communication. And then they communicated regularly, but they backed it up with action. All of their executives were bussed in, and they were cleaning the oil slicks. They put their money where their mouth was. They paid their people to stop their jobs and come and help with the cleanup. So when we say ownership and authenticity, you have to really actually care what happened, which I know we do, but you have to communicate that you care what happened. And then you have to take action steps, and that helps with trust. Are people happy that there's an oil slick and animals are dying? No one is happy about that. They have not suddenly made everyone happy, right? After they help clean it up, what's their next step? Here's what we're doing so that this never happens again. And we're going to be open and honest with you about what those steps are. And if you want to come in a year or 2 years and check and see how our processes and procedures are going, we would welcome those conversations. They did really well. Making a plan, it is, yay, ding, 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 making a plan in advance of a crisis situation. This is possible. It really, really is. In fact, every major corporation, organization, political institution, everyone, the White House has a crisis communications plan. So we're going to get into that after we say what are poor responses often criticized for. Being secretive, being insensitive, using improper modes of communication, being too slow to take action, saying too much of what isn't needed. That could be an issue too. Saying too little of what is. Typically, these happen because there is no plan and you're making decisions as you go in an already difficult situation. And in a church, a difficult situation is in the family, and it usually means that the decision makers who have to deal with it have relationships with the people who have sinned or are under investigation, and you're trying to determine, is this accurate? Those emotional responses, those emotional connections, it's not that they can't make good choices. Even though we have that, we're a family, right? Parents have to deal with that all the time. But it does influence, when you're already under a lot of stress, how well you communicate. and whether or not you're making good choices according to expertise that's already there. So we create a plan. Go for it. Guys, we're doing okay on time. Creating a communications plan. Communicating in a crisis begins well before the crisis occurs. Policies. Policies, we all have them. They are a protection, okay? Have them in place and follow them in practice. I can't tell you how many crises I responded to because someone was either unaware of a policy or they just didn't follow it. And that can be a small thing, it can be a big thing. So it's really important to have some examples. Employment policies, child protection policies. We can go through all the policies in all the land, right? I put Matthew 18 policies, right? I would challenge us as the church to say, are we being iron that sharpens iron for one another? Are we doing that together? Are we doing that with leadership? Are we seeing things and saying things to one another in love? If this isn't taught in your church, or you don't have policy, not necessarily policies, but modeling for this to be happening, then sin is not getting dealt with, and it will come out. And it might come out in small ways that people let slide. Those little slide things turn into big things. And then you call someone like me, because there's a huge problem. Okay? So yes, that is something I would say. You might not write that down in your policy book. Maybe you will. We'll just see what the Lord inspires. But I just want to encourage the church as a whole. God planned for this stuff because he gave us a way to deal with it before it was a huge issue. So policies, we need to be training and assessing them regularly. When we assess a policy, we should have a communications person there. When we're rewriting a policy, we should have a communications person there. Now, I know in churches, a lot of times we have communications people, and this is a really important role. They're good at communicate. We normally think of their job as being somebody who maybe they've got great graphic expertise. Maybe they are somebody who is an excellent writer, and that's their background, and they write really good blogs, or they write good newsletters, and they have a good sense of how to communicate and send those things out. This may or may not apply to us, but I think it does, at least at certain levels. We need somebody who's actually, when somebody would hire me, they'd hire me as a strategist. I'm not just a communicator. I come in with the CEOs, and we sit down and we say, okay, here are the things I've seen that might affect us. Okay, and so we need to get out ahead of these things. Or here's a policy change you're considering. Well, let me, when it's the appropriate time, I'm going to give you counsel on that. That means that your communications people really need to be in on the secret stuff. Otherwise, they will be surprised. And I've been in those situations where leadership, not necessarily in the Salvation Army, but where leadership didn't want to bring the communications people in. They really just wanted to let you know what they felt was important because they were trying to do their job well, right? We give grace. Like, they're trying to do their job well, and this is what they feel like they can share or should share. If the attorney's there, you need your strategist there, your communications person there. They need to be working together. Okay. All right. I already said that. Let your communications people be an asset. All right. So, creating a plan in advance of a crisis. One of the first things you can do is assess possible vulnerabilities. You really can do this as a community and get a fair amount done. There are companies that do this, and they'll come in and they will just look at everything that you have. They'll look at your child processes and procedures. They'll take a look and say, are you fulfilling all of them? Is there anything you can do better? They will look at everything. And then you draft documents based off of the vulnerabilities you've identified. All right? So we all know child protection is a huge one, right? That's going to be, even if you're doing really well, it is something that should be in every church's crisis communications plan. If there is a policy on a hot topic issue, you should have a crisis communication. You should have documents ready to go and a plan for what you're going to do if that ever happens, God forbid, right? And that's where this comes in alignment with your policies and procedures. This is where those two things marry. Some of these Some of these documents might be key message points. Sometimes you have a holding statement. And how you, again, I'm saying this is just a spark because every situation needs to be assessed and you need to use it properly. But a holding statement can really be because you want to communicate immediately. So you don't want 5 days to go down the road and suddenly people know some things are up. And maybe some other people have said some things because they didn't know they were supposed to keep their mouth shut, not to hide, but because they didn't know enough to be able to share and everybody's a little confused. You want to be able to communicate immediately something. And so you can create those kind of standard things. Who we are, you just want to communicate who we are as a community and that we care about whatever the situation is. You can create that. You can already have it ready. You can, and then your communications people or whomever can help you craft it for the actual situation. What you already will have, Q&A, you can assess what kind of questions would media ask in general. What kind of questions are your parishioners going to want to ask you? What kind of questions various audiences? Your partners are going to want to ask you. Friends, what kind of questions is your diocese going to want to know? I mean, you can identify all kinds of audiences. Then you create lists. Who are the decision makers if this happens? I just say you cannot make decisions by committee. I think, man, we just want to be agents of grace, right? And so I just want to give so much grace to the vestries who are dealing with such hard things. I just also want to say most of the time they're emotionally involved. They're already having to deal with a sticky situation. And then you're asking them to come up with a plan by committee with people who have no, or maybe one or two people who have communications background. And then we think we're going to, it's a recipe for not the best. And it's a lot of pressure. And it creates a lot of heartache we can't keep offense from happening, but we want to make an environment that is as conducive to not allowing for undue offense as possible. All right, so other lists. How do you reach the decision makers? Right? If something happens at 2 a.m. and you need to call somebody, you need to know that you've got their phone number not just at the office, but at home. Okay? What is the procedure when something happens? So if you got that holding document, you've already determined not just what's in the holding document, you've determined that you need to, in addition to having the holding document, when you see it, step one, these people come together, they craft it for the particular situation, which instead of taking 2 days to write a holding statement, that should take 1 hour, okay? You've now saved 47 hours of precious time, all right? So so you'd have something like that, so then it would be like, we've crafted it, now what are the avenues we're gonna communicate it through? Those kinds of things are all in the plan. What questions need to be asked? Who are your audiences? Who are your spokespeople? Your best spokesperson may not be the person in charge. And you need to have those conversations in advance. If something hard happens, we don't just automatically assume. When I was working, we would work with corporations, like heavy duty corporations, and their top person wasn't always the one who wanted to be doing the talking. Why? Because they were brilliant and like this, or they were nervous. They were so good at what they did, but they didn't come across great on camera or whatever. So you have to think about those things. Who's the best communicator? They still have to have a moral connection to the situation and authority, but it doesn't have to be. So you make those decisions in advance. Everyone agrees. When to call for legal help and who is tasked with this role, what communication streams are available. These are just examples. Regularly train your leadership and staff on your crisis media plan or crisis communications plan. Coordinate your plan with other levels of leadership. For us in the Salvation Army, we had a national plan, but that national plan, for disasters, we had, who do you call at the next level, at the lower levels? And, and there are processes and procedures, so who are we allowed to call? That's important in an organization. and everybody's agreed. We've already come to agreement. So if you get a call from Melissa Temme, when it normally wouldn't be okay for me to call this person directly, but when you get a call from me, oh, I can take this call, something's going on. You've already agreed of the channels. So you need to regularly train your leadership and staff, coordinate your plan with other levels of leadership. If it's a big enough issue, you have your parish's plan, but then it's got to roll into how does it fit with your diocese plan. Everybody should have a plan. And then update is needed. If a rector changes and the new person doesn't get put in your crisis communications plan and their information is not in there, then that's a single point failure, right? We're like, shoot. Okay, next one, please. My last slide, and then we'll do questions. How to communicate. Be honest, don't hide. First, you have to choose to have the hard conversation. You have to choose to have that hard conversation, not avoid it. The example I want to give is a good sea captain in a ship in a giant tsunami-type storm. If they turn their ship to the side to avoid the wave, it will literally capsize them. What does a good captain do? They point the bow. Did I say that right? They point the bow directly into the wave. And now that's going to be a rocky road, right? My dad was in the Navy in his early years, and he was in the South Pacific, and they got hit with a huge storm. He thought he was going to die. He said for 4 days, they were in a typhoon. He said the waves would go 40 feet high, and he had a great captain. But what it meant was they plowed right into those waves, and they went up. But what's on the other side of a 40-foot wave? A huge drop. You're going to experience some of that. This is not a silver bullet to not go through the hard stuff. It's how to go through the hard stuff and choose to go through it well. Don't leave it buried. Buried is gangrene, and it will poison your community. Be prepared. Is there anything else I have about that? Decide what the problem is, not just the impropriety, not just the issue that where so-and-so did this. What does that lead to? What's the deeper issue that the revelation of that will create? Is it broken trust? Is it questions about protection? What is the deeper issue? And then you want to keep that in mind every time you're writing something, every time you're communicating. All right, be prepared and communicate quickly. Be brave. Plan messages to say as much as you can. You really want 3 messages. The reason why that is a brain thing. Our short-term memory can usually only hold 3 clear thoughts. So we need 3 message points. Say as much as you can up front to get the situation behind you. Do not leave gaps for people to fill in. There are some great examples of where I have a friend, I'm going to give you her Substack. She has all kinds of fantastic communications advice about having difficult conversations at a crisis level. But one of the examples she gives is in a corporation, and a CEO has an improper relationship with an employee, and the employee decides to leave, and the employee's about to put their whatever in. And the news comes out that she's going to go spend some time with her family. And maybe that makes some news because she's high level. How interesting. She's going to go spend some time with her family. But you know who knows that's not true? There are people who know that's not true. So what you've got is a huge boulder that you're like, oh no, this is going to crush us. Let's just cut this little part out. We're just going to go bloop, and it creates a dust cloud, right? There's my little dust cloud. Whew, it's only a small dust cloud. But guess what happens the next week when it comes out? Because it always comes out. Sorry, I'm wagging my finger, but it always comes out. The next larger stone comes out that actually there was an improper relationship. That comes out. There it is. It's a larger one, larger dust cloud. Well, you know what your next story is? CEO ousted, right? And it's your next huge story. So now you're part of the media cycle like 12 times because you didn't drop the boulder once and let the dust cloud come up. Now, when we're dealing with investigations and things like that, you're gonna have a couple of media points, right? You're gonna have the initial drop. There are gonna be a couple more times where you're gonna have to communicate what's going on. There are going to be a few more, but if you did the first one well, it's going to be the big one, and you're going to get through a lot of stuff. You're going to get through a lot of stuff right off the bat. So you only want one dust cloud. You don't want 12 huge dust clouds. At the end of that, you have no credibility.
Yeah.
Okay? The trust is broken. And you, again, that's that secondary crisis you've now created. Even though you're trying to do the right thing, right? All right. Take responsibility where appropriate. If you make a mistake as you communicate, like, oh, we stretched the truth here because we weren't sure what to say, apologize. Say, you know what? We are grappling with this, and we're trying, and we're really sorry. We did not give you the whole story or the whole truth. So please forgive us. And from now on, we're going to do X, Y, Z. Attend to tone and body language. Don't be a robot. I am going to read my statement and run off the stage. Please don't do that. But it's okay to not know what to do, right? Get help. Just get help. Do not hesitate to get help from a professional. Communicating in a difficult situation is actually an expertise. It does not come naturally, and there are lots of people who can help you do it. All right, last one. Last slide. Here are resources.